Have you ever walked past a group of people and right after you pass them, you hear them laughing and it seems that they're laughing at you? You can't help but think you've done something or you get self-conscious and wonder if that's about you. Well, you're not the only one. In fact, this is an example of something commonly referred to as the egocentric bias. Now, what that is the egocentric bias is the tendency to rely too heavily on one's own perspective or have a higher opinion of oneself than in reality. Now, to clarify, what this means is someone may believe too strongly in his or her opinion, dismissing someone else's opinion as inferior. Now, since the egocentric bias influences the way we process and remember information, it's important to understand it. After researching this topic, I realized that some of my own recalled experiences could be distorted. In fact, having remembered my role in the event as more important than it really was. Today, I'll explain to you how an egocentric bias can lead to a distorted perception of reality, different ways that it can affect our lives, and a few techniques we can use to debias ourselves. The egocentric bias can cause people to be overconfident in their own opinion, dismissing others' viewpoints as incorrect. Now, the egocentric bias can lead to a distorted view of reality. Dr. Anthony Greenwald at Ohio State University, a psychologist there, explains the egocentric bias in memory is not just fairly common, it's universal. The reason is that it is more efficient to organize experience in terms of what happens to oneself than in any other format. Now, in an experiment testing the egocentric bias, Dr. Myron Zuckerman, a psychologist at the University of Rochester, found that in a group of people, in a group discussion, people consistently exaggerate their own importance in that group, or the work that that group did. According to Greenwald, the egocentricity bias also leads people to reinterpret events to put themselves in a favorable light. So they may remember something more if it makes them look better or remember themselves as having done something better. Now, there's a few ways the egocentric bias can affect us. There is something called the spotlight effect, and that's a cognitive bias that causes people to overestimate the degree to which other people notice and care about their appearance and actions. And I'm sure we can all relate to this. We're walking by and we don't quite look the way we want to, or maybe we didn't match our outfit as well as we wanted to, and we feel that it's more noticeable to other people than it really is. There's also something called the false consensus effect. This might be a bit more common. This is a cognitive bias that causes people to believe that their opinion and their beliefs are more common in the population than they really are. Meaning that I believe, or I think that what I believe about something is also what everybody else believes, and that may not necessarily be the case. And then there is the illusion of transparency. And this is a cognitive bias that causes people to believe that their internal state is more apparent to others than is actually the case. The best way I can describe this is on the borderlines of paranoia. Now, when somebody's paranoid, they think that somebody in front of them, for instance, can tell how they feel. So if you are giving a speech in front of a class, but in front of a real class, and you're not showing any outward signs of nervousness, but inside you are, in fact, very nervous, this is somewhat the illusion of transparency. If you think that the entire classroom can tell just how nervous you are, but when in fact you're not showing any outward signs of being nervous. So that is the illusion of transparency, is thinking that people can essentially read you and know what's going on in your head. Now, why do we experience this egocentric bias? Now, like any other cognitive bias, the egocentric bias occurs due to the limitations of our cognitive system. When it comes to how we remember events from the past, we tend to experience the egocentric bias because our cognitive system arranges memories around ourselves. And that would make sense because we are the most important things to any one of our lives, right? For example, a large number of studies show it is far easier for people to remember information if it somehow relates to themselves. So if you ask somebody about a particular day, they're more likely to remember that day or a part of that day if they were in fact in that event themselves. Now, there's a few ways that we can debias ourselves. We can use self-distancing language. Instead of thinking about ourselves in the first person, we should think about ourselves in the second person. So instead of saying I think or what should I do, I could say what should you do or what should John do? Use your own name. We could consider alternative viewpoints. For instance, if we're in an argument with a friend, we can put ourselves in their shoes. We can look at the argument from their perspective to understand why they feel the way they do, so that we focus less on ourselves. We could also increase our self-awareness. One study found that something as simple as sitting in front of the mirror as you're making a decision can help increase your self-awareness, reducing the egocentric bias you experience. The egocentric bias can cause people to be overconfident in their own opinion, dismissing other viewpoints as incorrect. An egocentric bias can lead to a distorted view of reality, can be categorized into a few different subtypes, and occurs due to the limitations of our cognitive system. Egocentric bias is a cognitive bias that causes people, and just about all people, to rely too heavily on their own point of view. It can cause people to underestimate how different other people's perspectives are than their own. We can use debiasing techniques to help us see things from people's points of view. And if done well, it can greatly help us see things more accurately for what they really are. So, when we are walking past a group of people and we do hear some laughter, that is very common. Everybody is, it's in our nature for everybody to feel that way. And usually 99.9% of the time, they are not laughing at you. It is just our egocentric bias that makes us think or makes us feel that essentially the world revolves around us.